First of all, thank you to the sponsors and the supporters for allowing me to have a conversation with you today. It's a privilege to be up here. I just have a couple of questions for a bit of a straw poll. If you put yourself back on station, think of your station office or your home office if you're out from the city here, just a show of hands, who relies on the mobile network as their principal form of internet connectivity? NBN, Skymaster? Starlink? Oh, good. Okay, thank you. Next question. Who here has seen ball lightning? You'd be surprised how many people have seen it. That's with my plasma physics hat on. I'll come back to that later. Also, I just want to give a big shout out to the agents of change here in the room, all of the various young'uns from the various organisations that are here today and who were here yesterday, and the student program as well. In fact, we're not going to get anywhere without you, so I'm glad to see that you're sticking through to the full two-day program. I want to talk a little bit about precision livestock management to smart livestock farming. Smart means something: sustainable, manageable and accessible rural technologies. And I've been in the ag tech game for all of my professional life. I should add that specific mention of products or services doesn't constitute an endorsement of those products and services, but I will acknowledge the many lessons learned, conversations shared, and insights that I have received and continue to get from the amazing ag tech community in this country. It is a world-leading community. So, my day job, I build and work on smart farms. Really, this is about working with commercial scale farming operations under commercial rules, full exposure to market conditions, but where we deploy data and digital enabled technologies to really get our heads around what does it really mean in operational systems. So you've got the sources of data, the various forms of ag tech, but of course it's what you do with that data that makes it worth it. Smart farms really kicked off in the mid-2000s. I mean, Armidale, where I come from in the New England, that's north in New South Wales. We were the place that the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard thumped the big green button and a light flashed somewhere in the room and suddenly we all had NBN. Of course, there's always helped by having an independent member with the power of balance in the Parliament to help along, and Tony Windsor played a big role in kicking things along. We built the first smart farm in Armidale, 2,700 hectares of sheep farm with a bit of beef thrown in to mix, and the rest is history. Now, the concept, of course, is we've got all of this data being created or potentially creatable from within a farming environment, and it's about bringing it into an operational heartbeat of the farming business. And, you know, when you look at the reality of smart farms today, they are there. There are farming operations that are generating enormous amounts of data, and at the end of the day, they're brought into the farm office. Now, this is an obvious extreme case. This is a spud farmer with more than 700 pivots and 220-something pumps in operation. But at the end of the day, the decision-making is still being made on the neck-top computer powered by a gut server. Getting the data aggregated is just a part of the journey. It's actually crossing that tech brain barrier that then allows us to put us into actionable insights and decision making. That's a constant struggle even today. I was really heartened to hear the conversation around data appearing in the last piece we just heard, because at the end of the day, data and digital is going to play an increasingly important role into the way we operate. What I find heartening is that we have producers around the country that are actually picking this up and running with it, moulding it into the shape and form that they need to operate their businesses. And when you look at what smart farming really is today, as relates to the livestock sector, farm side, it really is about monitoring the fundamental stuff. You know, water, for example, is a key one. Here's an example of a property called Willow out near Brewarrina, New South Wales, a good friend of mine, Derek Schneider and family. So 30,000 acres, 1,200 sheep and 1,600 head of cattle. And at the end of the day, that property management really boils down to water and feed base and animals, of course. And so when you look at the dashboard that this particular farming family uses, and this is using a network that they created themselves. They have tried and busted so many options in the marketplace, they ended up just cooking up their own. At the end of the day, it's about measuring and monitoring the fundamental things that help them make their day-to-day decisions. And it's about critical assets, critical infrastructure like water, power consumption, making sure bores are running, make sure the water's into tanks, the water flowing from the tanks into the troughs, keeping a close eye on the feed base, understand their stocking rates and plan their stock movements accordingly. And this particular part of the country is no exception in terms of requiring the same things. So there's a salient point that's going to start popping up through this presentation, is that in fact you can learn more from trying something and busting something than you can from perhaps not trying anything at all. And that was a point raised by our opening keynote yesterday morning. If I look back, there was high hopes for precision livestock management. Back in the 2000s, many of us in the R&D community set forth on a mission. We'd spent the 1990s developing and deploying yield monitors on harvesters to allow us, along with GPSs on board, to measure and map grain yield to give us ultimately our yield maps, which means yield variations, which means, what can I do here to up the productivity? Or maybe I lock up that portion of a paddock, knowing what my bottom line is. We set out on a mission to move that sort of thinking into the livestock industry. At the time, all we had was store on board collars, and we used to scruff the animals down, put the collars on and send them out to graze and just record data, and every couple of weeks we'd bring the animals in, head bar them up, pull the collars off and download the data. But what that allowed us to understand was, and to recognise, was the nature of the variation in grazing behaviour and the impact it had on the feed base. This was a progenitor of, you could almost suggest, would be the world's first ever yield map for livestock. So you might have an average paddock yield in this particular case of 26 kilos per hectare per annum, but in fact there is an order of magnitude difference between the yield, the weight gain yielding capability of that paddock, one section of the paddock compared to the other. That's exactly the same sorts of things that we threw up in the 1990s when we first deployed yield monitors on harvesters. There is a substantial difference in productivity of our fields. We knew that, but now you can see it and you can understand exactly how much. That was really what the journey was all about, or supposed to be about, when it came to precision livestock management. And of course, fast forward to today, and what we're seeing is an emergence of an increasing number of options for producers who may want to get into that livestock tracking side of their business and understand their livestock land use interactions, for example. In the early days, it was all about getting maximum efficiency out of pastures, but it's also now about considering the sustainability elements of grazing management on the farm as well, as we heard a little bit earlier today. And while Cerastag were a pioneer, an Australian pioneer in launching out the tracking capability in a form factor that could be deployed in the field, we now have other options as well, with smart paddock, for example, movement, and more. So this future is coming quicker than we expected, and in some cases it's here now. And it's more than just about knowing where your animals are, it's understanding your landscape interactions, it's biosecurity opportunities associated with it, traceability, and so forth. Now, when I was asked to present here, I was asked, look, you're in the ag tech game, but for goodness sakes, keep it real. And so I thought, well, okay, let's talk about the simple stuff, the stuff that works. But you know, the thing is, when I look at the byline for this event, which is around strengthening foundations, forming connections, with my technology hat on, I'm thinking about what are the fundamental foundations that the industry could do with, that can be supported by technology. And when I hear about getting connected, I'm talking about getting connected in terms of the data generating elements of our sector. So if you look at the sort of the chain along the bottom of the slide, that starts with, of course, the animals in the field, and you run them through the system, you know, they're yarded up, they're put onto trucks, there might be interactions with spelling yards, back on the trucks, moving to an aggregation point, offloading or unloading up for aircraft and ships, off overseas, and obviously ultimately to the consumer. Look at the interconnections in terms of the data needs. We've got, as we heard earlier today, Environmental social governance requirements of reporting. We've got emissions reporting. And remember, one person's Scope 1 reporting in terms of emissions is another person's Scope 2 or Scope 3 reporting. So being able to collect data from your part of the value chain is not only potentially important for you, but is potentially important to either a client of yours, upstream or downstream, or their clients. And we all have a role to play, and data and digital will help in that space. And as the questioning went in the previous section, of course, you know, data and digital are a key part of, if you like, compliance as well. Traceability is the other layer that's matter, and it's not just about food safety, product recall, 1 or 2 steps up or downstream, but it's clearly, as we heard from Jason earlier today, a key part of our market access. Provenance, for example. Biosecurity. You've only got to open the FMD guidelines for biosecurity action, and that sends a shiver up your spine. I know FMD, you know, we're right, okay, but at the end of the day, you know, accounting for where an animal's been every day of its life, and any animal that's been in contact with it where it's been every day of its life, the whole thing will explode out rapidly in terms of where are the animals, where have they gone, and where are they likely to go. Another connection. And of course, we've got the SCAS that we heard a little bit about earlier today as well. So when I talk about keeping it real, the art of the possible, right, which is more than an art form, it's actually the science of the plausible. We can make a big difference now. We've got all the building blocks right here, right now. And in fact, when I think about how we can join the dots and strengthen the system, I'm really talking about joining the data. And in fact, when I was thinking about my talk over the last day and a half, I have to acknowledge that many of the building blocks are sitting just in the hallway behind us here today. And so, talking to many of the various stakeholders, you can form a picture of where the opportunities really lie in terms of how we can join the dots. And so, when we hear about the Internet of Things and data connectivity, when it comes to IoT, in our sector here, livestock are the thing. And for example, and just to perhaps give you a bit of a taster, we already have, of course, the NLIS and VID tags in our animals. And if you haven't already heard, there's a lot of other movements around about what other fingerprinting mechanisms can we use for animals. Is it eye detection? Is it nose detection? Is it hindquarters detection? And depending on which part of the country you come from, this country, you'll be interested to know there's a bit of a geographic set of favourites between each of those. But here's an example of a team from TerraCypher who's working in partnership with Integrity Systems, my organisation, Food Agility, and Charles Sturt University. So that's an example of a smartphone app that you take a photo of the animal's nose, and there's some examples of the tag ID that's generated on the right, and effectively the accuracy or the certainty that you have of knowing that that is that animal. And they range from about 77% to about 89%, but when you read the literature out there, you can hit 100% if you put the right analytics to play. So that's a bit of a greenfield. I just thought I'd throw that up. And this is going to be important when I come to the next range of points I'm going to raise, because, okay, looking around the room, what are the key enablers of joining the data dots in a live export supply chain scenario? Well, we have a marketplace now with tags that can be used to complement the NLIS that could give you other extra power on your farm. The positioning ear tags, for example, or the unique animal ID. Because for this to work, you've got to make sure that you know the animal and the animal is always where you think it is. Interesting conversation with the team at Allflex and Cam Ralph. Thank you for the comments. You know, you've now got an ear tag, and if you can prise Cam's fingers into his top pocket on his shirt, he'll pull out and show you that wonderful little ear tag that Allflex are in the process of launching, which has got the temperature sensor for the ear canal that does it automatically. And that thing flashes when there's an issue with that animal in terms of its temperature. So feedlot applications, absolutely. For example, the Sense Hub feedlot. But, you know, this is the progenitor of a technology class that will be sitting on our animals in the near future. You know, we've got Road Trains of Australia, for example. You know, they've got a wonderful system for tracking and tracing all of their vehicles, agricultural products, livestock movements, mining, whatever, heavy equipment, you name it. You add to the carrying the cattle crates on those trucks a high flow panel reader, for example. We know we've got access to narrowband IoT through 4G and 5G mobile phone networks. We've also got low Earth orbit satellites, and I think I heard an oblique reference to them earlier with our water examples, New South Wales water monitoring. And in fact, it's not inconceivable that a truck carrying cattle from point A to point B would be considered as its own PIC, property identification code, vehicle identification code. Why not? It's got animals there, they're commingling, they are at a place of residence, albeit for a few hours through to a couple of days plus or minus spell yards. So we know technically we can empty the NLIS record stored on an onboard scanner on a truck to a satellite or through the narrowband IoT capability of our mobile phone network. We can do that. So why can't we take the worry out of the manual scanning and have an automatic system? So you add to that what we've already seen emerging now in terms of some of the trial research outputs, for example, that LiveCorp and MLA are in partnership with. We know that we can identify animals and we can track them through a process, for example, counting them on as they load up onto ships or in yards or aggregation points. We also know that we can identify animals and track their movement behaviour as potentially a surrogate for their health status. Now, interesting to hear that one of the speakers earlier this afternoon has a poultry operation. You put 10,000 birds in a shed, the way those animals clump, those birds clump and disperse are actually a really good indicator of the way they fill the microclimate environment. So it can be used as also as a means of maintaining climate control, feeding back in the sheds as well. Now, this stuff is doable now. It's a matter of just joining the dots and starting to get them connected and flowing, get them out of pilot phase, getting them into operational phase. Telecommunications connectivity is always an issue, and I did ask the question about mobile versus Sky Muster versus Starlink, because we're constantly retrofitting Australia with extra telecommunications and broader coverage telecommunications background. But of course, you imagine when you move into a ship, for example, or an aircraft, a ship in particular, that's a really complicated and challenging telecommunications environment, especially if potentially you've got 11,000 or 50,000 animals, depending on the type of animal, on board. Each and every one of them could potentially be generating data about their health and well-being. So that's going to create enormous challenges. But we already know that some of the trial work done with LiveCorp and ScanReach, for example, as evidenced in their report from August last year, suggests it is doable. You can retrofit mesh Wi-Fi networks in a shipborne environment. Talking to the crew from Wellard yesterday, and I acknowledge them for their contributions as well, you've only got to look at the plans for the amazing Ocean Jillaroo concept, and you build a ship from scratch, suddenly you can put an optical fibre network through that ship. Why? Because it's cheap, because you're building the dang thing, thread the fibre around. It's not unlike what some of our leading corporate farmers are doing. When they're now moving onto land and aggregating farms into bigger operations, they're redesigning paddocks, they're laying down communications networks, architecture, and they're laying out their water before the animals march on the farm. So we've got a beautiful greenfield here to really start experimenting with what the science of the plausible actually is about when it comes to telecommunications. So data, of course, is the blood that's going to flow through the veins of our ecosystem. And I wanted to give you a bit of an insight into an approach that's getting a lot of traction when it comes to sharing and moving data around. I think we all agree, and they're pretty well the rules of engagement, if we're going to build a data sharing infrastructure to serve our operational needs, those stakeholders up and down our value chain, which hopefully will return value to us as a producer, but also to support the regulatory compliance necessities that we have to all be a party of, then there are some simple rules. First of all, the generators of the data will own it. So in my case, when I consider where most of the data is coming from, I'm going to put the producer front and centre. So the model is, it's got to be producer-centric. Producers have to be in control of that data. When you're sharing data from point A to point B or into multiple ingest points, the data has to be standardised so that the systems are speaking the same language. And at the end of the day, the ideal scenario is we have a scalable system that if you wake up in the morning and you want your data now to go to Actor C, you can do that without having to rebuild or re-architect anything. They're the key components. So when we talk about a data revolution, this is a data sharing revolution, not a data aggregation revolution. And it's got to be important that at the end of the day, you have a service provider or a data generator. That message structure has to be standardized in order to be put to work, and backwards and forwards. So, for example, there's a project that we are partnering with Integrity Systems and company TerraCypher to pilot the notion of what we call Agri-Tracker. In other words, the producer may have their NLIS records. They may have some other data generating technology. It could be Ceres-Tag, it could be OptiWay, it could be FarmBot on the troughs and so forth. And at the end of the day, you get to select who will see your data, where you want it to be directed to. And until you click that button to enable the sharing, it goes nowhere. And remembering that you only have to turn that button back off and the data then goes nowhere. So in other words, this is all about effectively a data sharing ecosystem where the producer is in control. Now, if you're interested in being a part of the trial that we're running at the moment, it's a bit of a call out. Email info@terracipher.com, or you can drag me out of the proceedings and email me. So in other words, if you've got data, if you've got NLIS data, you've got other data, it could be Auctions Plus data, for example, or it could be from some other third-party provider that's providing information into your farming operation, and you want to move that data to somewhere else. For example, it could be a finance actor or an insurance actor. It could be for some other purpose, for logistical management purposes, for example. Then we can create and run a scenario and give you a crack at trying it. So we're really keen to find people that may want to try this model, because our hand-on-heart view is that this is the future of data sharing, not data aggregation. So I guess what I want to close off by saying really is that joining many of the dots when it comes to shoring up our foundations and getting connected, it's actually all technically feasible. We've done pilots. We've done them to death almost. It's time now to have a crack and stitch it all together. But if I take a quote from Stephen Day, Major General Stephen Day yesterday, really, is it humanly possible? And it's a plain words, are we willing to have a crack? Are we willing to let down some of the barriers we have with our attitudes and our notion of who's a competitor or who's a friend of our business? Then I think the answer is yes, we can do this if we put our heads together. And you have to realise that state by state there is a whole range of initiatives whereby funds are made available to help you get started in this space. It could be around purchasing some technology for your station, for your business operation, and it can be and aggregating it and using it, sorry, not aggregating it, but using it for greater purposes. For example, and I'll just quote a few, we've got the Victorian funded IoT trials. We've got the New South Wales Farms of the Future program, the Queensland Ag Tech Hubs. South Australia's got the PIRSA Ag Tech demo sites. Here in the Territory, we've got Digital Territory. We've got Ag Tech Innovation WA. This is money that's available to help you purchase into this. There's catalogues in general. You can select technology, you can make a case for it and get a subsidy to buy into it. So have a crack. And I think that's the real point, is that don't let excellent be the enemy of good when it comes to trying some of this stuff. You've got to make a step. And again, just to quote Stephen Day yesterday, I've learned more from what didn't work than what did. And I have a lesson also that I like to impart to international colleagues that like to sweep their technology and their silver bullet solutions into Australia. If you build it here in Australia, if you build it here, you'll make it over there. If you make it over there, you will break it here. And at the end of the day, we are a crucible for this stuff. There are enormous challenges to meet, but we can do it. So I think we should have a crack. Thank you very much.
Questions, anybody, please? Hands in the air anywhere? If you do, just wave your hands. We're hard to see you here. You've got one over there. Oh, yeah, over the far side.
I should publicly acknowledge my wife too for all the photographs. She's a photographer.
Hi David, great presentation. Thanks very much. Andrew Dolchan here. But just like your comment about data aggregation rather than the sharing rather than aggregation. So hopefully we can use the information 10 different ways. Instead of collecting it 10 different ways and using it once, we can collect it once and use it 10 different ways, you know. So great presentation.
I heard the great presentation, but thank you very much. I've had a lifetime of shooting, so I'm deaf as all hell in one ear, but I still couldn't hear you with the other. Was there something you wanted me to answer in that? Thank goodness that Don had the same problem.
No, just a comment to say using it 10 different ways and entering it once instead of entering it, you know, 10 different times and only getting to use it once. I think that's why people get so frustrated with this stuff.
Yeah, look, absolutely, and goodness knows how many people have got cupboards full of legacy technology and ones that don't work or they hit the market and whatever. Yeah, totally agreed. What I should add is that, and in a way it's in our own DNA as well, we have to. We can't survive as a cooperative research centre without it. Everything we do, and what I'm observing more and more now, thankfully, is done as pilots. Don't just go away, do research, write a fat report and then hope that people will take it up. Pilot and bust something on the way. And we're happy to do it at our expense too.